difficult to know whether I'm talking about something that you all know heaps about and you're really disinterested, or that you don't understand and you'd like me to go into a bit more detail. So I'll try and bounce things off, so feel free to interrupt. So if everyone's ready for me to roll, we'll get into it. So where I thought we would start, and I'm going to go right back to the beginning, and this is why I'm a little concerned that I may be, you know, a lot of you probably may have a lot of knowledge about this stuff, so speed me up if you want. But let's go back to thinking about northern farming systems. We tend to have predominantly summer rainfall. We have clay vertisol soils that hold water. And so one of the first things we need to think about is just how much water do our soils hold, and what's the value of that water that's held in the soil. So if I use terms like water holding capacity or PAWC or pork or anything like that, would everybody know what I meant? Can we? Otherwise, I will jump and pick on people.
Anyone in the group?
That you, Janelle? Anyway.
Yeah, no, I know the basics, but I'm not sure about everyone else, and I'm happy to go through it. There's nothing, you know, there's no harm in a refresher.
Righto. Yes. So let's work through it slowly. I keep moving my mouse and then things don't move. So let's think about growing a crop. If we have a lot of water, a lot of soil, water in our soil, we can grow a big crop. If we only have a little bit of water, we grow a smaller crop. So we've got two sources of water for growing a plant. We've got our rainfall, which comes during the season. We also have the water that we've stored in our soil, either left over from the previous season and what's been gathered in any sort of fallow up until when we plant it. Here's another question for you. Many of you seen this sort of diagram that describes, it's just a way of visualizing soil water. And so what we have here is depth. So if we're thinking that we're going down to about 6 feet into the soil, the most amount of water that a soil can hold is called this drained upper limit. The most amount of water and between the drained upper limit and what this red line, which is the lower limit, this is the maximum amount of water that a plant can suck out of the soil. There is water over here, but that's unavailable to plants because they don't have the ability to suck the pressure, create enough pressure to drag that water out. So when people talk about the bucket or the amount of water held in the soil, they're talking about the amount of water between these 2 points, all the way down the soil. So are people generally familiar with that? Thumbs up, clap hands on the images, on your icons on the Zoom. Yeah, we're getting a few. Righto. So if we're thinking about where our sources of water come from, we can grow exactly the same size crop with a big soil, with a lot of soil water and a small rainfall event, probably like what you guys experience in the north. Or I do a fair bit of work down in Wagga and down to Urannah and the Victorian border, and they've probably got the reverse situation where they start the year with a very small bucket of water, but they get a heap of rain during winter. I know I've got corn, maize there, but let's imagine it's a wheat crop. Okay, so there are two ways of getting water. The big issue we have is at planting. We know how much water we might have in the soil, but we have no idea how much rainfall we're going to get, whether it's going to be a good year or a bad year. So what I'm going to try and do is show you a little video now that hopefully puts some of that into context. If we look here on the left-hand side, this is what I'm trying to predict here. So this is that drained upper limit of the soil on both sides. This was an experiment we did following a sorghum crop at Yallaroy. The left-hand side was wide skip sorghum, so there's not a lot of stubble left there. The right-hand side was exactly the same, except for we plant a millet crop to try and get a bit of cover and help improve the water infiltration. That's probably not the main message of what I'm trying to deliver here, but what I'm showing is the value of storing water in the soil and how that benefits following crops. So I'm going to start this and hopefully I'm going to manually run it through. So what you can see here in the blue line, or the blue bar that's coming up, is the amount of rainfall. The light blue filling in between the lower limit and the drained upper limit is the amount of water stored in the soil. So as you can see, as we run, you can see the dates down the bottom changing. We're now on the 16th of the 5th. We've had basically the same amount of rainfall and they've got exactly the same amount of water in the soil in both profiles. If we move along to here, whoop, went too far. At this point, everything's occurred exactly the same. From now on, we're going to grow our little millet crop and we're going to grow it for about 6 weeks. So there's the millet crop growing and you can see that it's actually removed more water than what was happening in the fallow on the left-hand side. From this point on, we've now got stubble cover on our right-hand side and little stubble cover on the left. When it rains during the summer, you can see the soil starts to fill up. And with that big, I'll go back a bit, with that big rainfall event there, you can suddenly see that the soil has filled up more where there was stubble and there's been more runoff. So we haven't lost any water, it's just more has run off the soil. So as we fill that up, you can see that by the end of the summer, so we have a full profile of water on the right-hand side, probably about 3/4 of a full profile on the left-hand side. If we run this through and plant a wheat crop, which we did just then, and you can see the wheat crop grows and starts to use the water. As that goes down, at about this point, we're starting to get stress on the left-hand side. It's running out of water. There's still some water on the right-hand side. And as we pull that through, you start to see about a 500 kilo yield improvement on the right-hand side. There's bigger biomass, but you can get some idea that that little bit of stubble, was of benefit. I'll pause now. If anyone wants any questions, jump on and just ask them or shoot me a message or whatever, whichever's easiest.
Jeremy, could you go back to the end of that slide so we can see the difference? Yeah, thanks.
There we are. I made these slides for a meeting I made this video in about, I think it was 2010. So my apologies for the dodgy appearance of it. I'm sure I could probably do a better job now.
No, it gives a good explanation of what's happening. One thing I've always tried to get my head around, Jeremy, is, you know, I don't know how many farmers actually go out and measure their upper drain limit and their lower drain limit, and whether they're just using, you know, some values that have been measured on the farm up the road at some stage, or, you know, or a similar soil type. What's the value of really knowing your own soils, I guess?
I think there is real value in knowing how much water your soil holds for helping you make decisions, but it is a big effort to go and get it. So there's websites. So, I mean, a lot of my work's done through AppSim, and these simulations are done through AppSim. And through CSIRO and through the AppSim initiative, we have a free database of all the soils we've ever tested. So quite often you can get profiles from anywhere near you. There's also continuous projects where people are going out and getting that information for different groups. And I know we've worked with different Landcare groups and different farmer groups to basically help people do it themselves. So there is a number of publications and bits of information that explain how to do it or where you could do it. But getting a soil from somewhere close by is better than nothing. Having some idea of how much water your soil holds. But if you're on a grey vertisol, there are some, they're pretty similar, as long as you don't have salts and things coming in underneath. Has that sort of answered that question?
Yep, thanks.
Cool. So I'll move on. So how much water do you have? And this is getting to what your question was, really, I guess. So how much water and where are you going to get it from? So we do have the option of getting water from rain. And this is a website, or basically I made these graphs years ago, and a colleague here saw it and said I could turn that into a web page for you. So there's the web link. And I will going to try and do the thing you should never do, is run it live now and see whether I can actually show you how it works. I'll need to reload that. I probably should have done that before I dragged it across, but can you guys all see the web page that's come up in front? Thumbs up. Who's wearing a red shirt? Give me a thumbs up. Yeah, good, right. So the way this works, it's just looking at your MET file. So I'm assuming a lot of you are from around the Garrah area. So let's load the Garrah MET file. Now, if you want to download a MET file, you can go to the long paddock. Queensland government provides it for the whole of Australia. So you can get, and that's where this MET file has come from. And so you can download a MET file for a site close to you. I'm using a 100-year MET file here, and we'll go for a whole year and have a look at just what it says. Don't worry about the red. We're trying to fix that. So how clearly is that popping up on your screens? Some of the writing's pretty small. Is it, you can sort of make it out? I'll try and.
I can read it. My eyes aren't that great.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is from 1900 through till, it's actually through till last week, but I think we've cut, it's probably gone to January, probably gone to the beginning of this year. So in here, you can see where my mouse is. That's the randomness of rain, of annual rainfall. You know, you get good years, you get bad years. On average, it's about, I think that's 552 written in there. Is that what you guys reckon your rainfall roughly is, or have I got it wrong?
Yep.
Sorry, I was just reading Bill's question. I thought I'd maybe missed something.
You know, we're 550 to 600 mil.
Yep. So that's 500 mils, that is, sorry. Anyway, 552, there it is. So what we've then done is sat the rainfall from highest to lowest. And it's always interesting to look at that one and say 2019 was the lowest year on record. And 1950 was probably the highest. When I've done this, a lot of people have always told me, you know, well, an interesting thing to look at is let's just look at the last 10 years. And so I've coloured those in, and you can start to see that on average, those 10 years were below the long-term average, but there were 5 occasions when you yielded, you had more water or more rainfall than average. That one will be 2016. No, 2011. There you go. Caught me out. There we are, 2016. You didn't get as much rain as everyone else did. That's right, because it all fell in winter. So another thing you can do with this is, if you're thinking about that, let's say winter goes from, we'll split the year in two. So let's go from about the 15th of March to about the 1st of the 10th. And so there we can start looking. Now I've got 2016. So this little website is available to you guys. Jump on it, have a play. I know lots of people like to look at their rainfall. But I guess the main message I'm trying to say is that rainfall is really variable. And if we're trying, we know we've got some water in the soil, but we're trying to guess how much water we're going to get during the season. So using this as a bit of a guide, you know, if we're looking at our winter season, the long-term average, we're going to get about 230 mils on average. But that could be as poor as 73 mils or as great as 597 mils in that same period. But on average, it's around that 235. In the last 10 years, it's been around 193, so around 200 mils. Does anyone want me to try anything else with this while I've got it up? Deathly silence. I'll move on. Okay, so in the PowerPoint I've provided and the PDF, I've just included a couple of examples of those in case you didn't want to. Well, it was also in case the web didn't work and I wasn't able to make that little app run. So.
Jeremy, is it easy to customise that for the participants to go in if they're not from the Garrah area to bring up that data for their regions?
Yeah, I'll bring it back up. All you need is a MET file. So I have a list of them here that I've downloaded from the long paddock. So if you go to longpaddock.com, you can download any of these. I'm just looking to see whether I had more I don't have any other close ones. Yeah, or Billabilla it would be the next sort of closest, just up over the border. And so, yeah, we can just load that and look at its wet rainfall for exactly the same period.
Yeah, great.
Right. So I don't know whether you guys think about targeting yields when you are going to plant a crop. You know, roughly in your area, if you're going to plant and you're having to make a nitrogen decision, what sort of yield do you target? So these list of questions are what I tend to work through with people. So how much does it cost to plant your crop? So rough. And how much cost do you need to make? So I guess what I mean by that is if it costs $330 to make to plant your crop, if they're your variable costs, your sorghum price, let's say, is 210. It's a pretty small return, but let's say you want to make 20% on that. So we want to make $404 a hectare just to cover our costs and keep things going. To do that, we must get 2 tonnes. So how much water do we need to get 2 tonnes? Some of you may be familiar with the concept of water use efficiency. It's basically you just take the grain, you say, what's your grain yield and how much rainfall and stored water did you have to get that grain yield, and divide them. So basically here we take in-crop rainfall, we add how much water we had in the soil. I'm subtracting any soil water that was left in the soil at the end of the season. Now, it's always debatable whether you add 100 mils or not. A lot of people say, you know, it doesn't make sense sometimes in the north, but you generally need about 100 mils to get a crop up to a point where it can start yielding. Some people describe that as evaporation, and evaporation will be mixed up in that calculation. But either way, these are a whole lot of sorghum crops. These were, I think, around the Condamine region. And you can see it's a bit of a shotgun, and we rule a line through there to give ourselves a rough rule of thumb that in this environment, it was about 15 kilograms of grain for every millimetre the crop saw. So this work was done years ago by French and Schultz. It works much better in the south than it does in the north. You know, because you can get a whole lot of rain falling at the end of the season. So this, you know, look at this one down here. Hasn't got a great yield, but it's had a whole lot of rain. And the main reason is that rain probably fell once the yield had been set. But in our calculation, we don't distinguish timing. If you want to distinguish timing, you use a crop model like APSIM or something like that. Anyway, has anyone got some questions or anything on the idea of water use efficiency? And my main point here was, this is how I came up with a rough rule of thumb of 15 kilograms per millimetre for sorghum in an area fairly close to where you guys are. I know, I'm trying to think of his name now. Some of the guys in a bit further north would tell me I should be using 18 or 20, and some people even say up to 28. But you've seen, there's my logic. I just ruled a line through a big mass of points. Okay, no questions? Righto. So I'm using that. Oh, I've gone backwards. So I'll use that. Let's say we need 100 mils to germinate. 15 kilograms per mil. We want our 2 tonne yield. So we're going to need 133 mils plus the 100 to account for growth. Gives us our 233 mils. So where are we going to get that from? So these are a series of long-term simulations I've done, and I did a whole lot of work with a grower group out at Welbon, and this is how we eventually decided to put things together. So the way you use them is you say, if I need 2.5 tonnes, and this is how much water I have in the soil. If I need 2.5 tonnes, I've only got about a 20% chance of getting it if I planted with 50 mils of water in the soil, on average. So this is using 100 years of simulations to try and get over some probabilities. If I need if I have 200 mils of water in the soil, assuming my soil can hold that much, you know, I'm sitting up here at 75%. I've done them, I didn't have any of these for Garrar itself, so I've done Moree and I've done Mungandai, hoping that somewhere between that you guys can work it out. These are always a bit tricky, and then suddenly people get their heads around them and they love them. But one way to think about it, it's very similar to the rainfall. What I've done is done 100 years of crop yields, and I've just put them in order from lowest to highest. And I started the year, every one of these simulations has experienced the same climate. The only difference is how much water was in the soil at sowing. And I've controlled that because it's a model. So by using these, you can get a rough idea of your probability of what's your chances of getting 2.5 or 2.5 tonnes. If you're pushing for 5 tonne and you've only got 50 mils of water at sowing, well, you really, you're down here in less than 10% chance. So you can do it, and we all know that, have that neighbour that, sowed on a wing and a prayer and got the best yield anyone's ever got, but we can't do it every year. So this is just trying to deal with probabilities on how you deal with things every year. So is there any questions or anyone wants to ask anything on that? I use a different, I don't use Zoom, I use a different meeting app, and it actually pops everybody's name up. This one doesn't, so I can't pick on you either. You're lucky for that. I can't start naming people and asking their opinions.
Jeremy, I'm assuming you run that for winter crops as well?
Yeah, I run it for all crops. Sorry?
Yeah.
I usually, beg your pardon, sorry?
It is interesting data.
Yeah, so I am debating whether, I get asked by mainly consultants. A lot of consultants use these, and they really like them because, I don't think you'll mind me saying, Greg Rummery out at Walgett has them laminated, and he likes them because he drops them on the front of the ute when they're deciding whether to plant, and he starts saying, well, mate, you're sitting here. Do you really want to invest the money, or do we go on holiday for this, for this season? So it is quite a useful tool. Anyway, I'll push on.
Jeremy.
Yeah.
Jeremy, what is the millimetre requirement for wheat, say, for your winter? Like, I know this is on sorghum, but what is your is there a graph like that for the wheat, like Janelle was saying?
Yeah, yep. And I can probably pull one up reasonably quickly if we want to. But what I might do is I'll finish the talk, and if you like, I can probably put a collection of them from Moree and Mungandai together and sit them on that Dropbox link, and you can download and have a look at them if that's. And then you may want to just give us a ring if you need me to explain any of it.
Thanks, Jeremy.
I know I've done a set. I've done a lot for Mungandai, and it's probably a good time to mention that I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the farming systems trial that's run out at Mungandai. We're about to get on to some of that data. Andrew Erbecker runs it, so he's based in Queensland, but they look after the Mungandai site. We also have a site at Narrabri and down on the Liverpool Plains that are run by New South Wales DPI. We also have them up in Emerald and Pampas. So that's a farming systems site, but the interesting bit is all the rules that are run on the decisions on when to plant are all based off these rainfall chart, off these. So we have a rule that says unless you have 100 mils, you're not allowed to plant. So we measure the amount of water in the soil. We look at what the 50 and the 90, and we fertilise for either 50 or for 90 yields. And that's how we make our decisions. But we'll get on to that, and I think that's coming up to the next slide. Yep.
Jeremy, it'd be great if when we do put that Dropbox together to also possibly include some data from the Liverpool Plains, because I think there could be some participants that are from down in that Gunnedah area. So that'd be great.
Yep, no, we can do that. Easy. So there's lots of talk. Moments you start talking rotations, you get people. It's almost like religion. There's lots of different schools of thought. So some people really like the idea of a fixed rotation, so that they'll plan their rotation around disease, usually disease, weeds, and chemistry of herbicides, and then you just follow that rotation time after time. You know, a fairly common one, especially in the north, will be probably a sorghum crop, long fallow into a chickpea crop, short fallow into a wheat crop, may do a barley crop then, and then back into sorghum. Or you know, if you skip the barley, you've got was it three crops in 4 years. Otherwise, people will grow them out a little bit. The flip side of that is that people will talk of pillar crops, where you will take a crop like cotton that's high value, and you work out the best opportunities to plant it. So say planting it once every 2 to 3 years, and then you just fill in with other crops that will support that pillar crop, basically giving you a wheat crop before it and a long fallow to ensure you capture as much water in your soil as you can. The flip side, as you get further north and start heading up to Emerald and places where they are purely opportunistic, and it's probably also, as you move further west, people become opportunistic. When there is enough water to sow, you sow, otherwise you don't. So the big question is, how do you decide what crop, when you're going to put it in? I'm happy for someone to inform me how they do it. Otherwise, I'll just keep working on. Sorry, we've got a question here that I just missed. So I guess the question on water use, we'll just deal with that quickly. Is there a significant difference between the different plants? Yes, there is, and it's not just the architecture of the plant. The types of plant when it's sown, whether it's a summer or a winter. So winter plants will use a lot less. They'll use the same amount of water. Well, they'll use water, but there's a lower evaporation from the soil and lower temperatures. So the plants take water up to also keep themselves cool. And so in hot conditions or dry conditions, they can keep them, so they pump a lot of water through to keep themselves cool. I'm not sure whether I've answered that question, but I'll keep going and keep my eye on the chat line. Okay. After having shown you one of these exceedance plots for rainfall and for soil water, we're now looking at it for dollars. So here I've picked a rotation, a really low intense rotation. So this is some of the work of the Northern Farming Systems Project, where we were looking at how does intensity, or the more crops you plant, how does that improve your profit? So I'm only going to focus, I know we've got a few people from Gunnedah, so you guys can keep your eye down on this square, but I'm mainly going to talk across here. Pampas is just out of Toowoomba, but it's just about 750 mil rainfall, so probably not that different to Inverell. Gundawindi, let's place it a bit like Moree, and then Mungandai's Mungandai. So if we plant a really low intensity rotation where we've got Each of the X's is a 6-month fallow. So we've got wheat, summer fallow, winter fallow, summer fallow, chickpeas, and then the same. So we've got 18 months between crops. A cropping intensity there of 0.5 because we get 2 crops in 4 years. Pretty low, but it is what a lot of people in the western areas were falling into in those drought, following on from the last few droughted years. So looking at pampas, you can see this line here goes, basically it's almost straight down, which is saying that the environment can handle that really long rotation, spaced out rotation really easily. Mungandai, you're getting a bit more of an S shape. These are usually the bad seasons where you make little money, and these are the good seasons where you're making more money. If we intensify that by saying we're going to throw in an extra crop, so now we're going to throw in a sorghum crop, Pampas handles it well, so it just makes more money all the way up. But you start to see in Gundawindi and certainly in Mungandai that intensity, having an extra crop in, is starting to cost. It's still profitable, but it's not making as much money, mainly because there's a limit of water. It can handle it in the good seasons, but there's stress in the poor seasons. And generally the message here is I'm just adding more and more crops. The final one is a really intense situation where we're trying to add a cropping intensity of 1.3, where we're trying to get basically 4 crops in 3 years. I guess my message here is there's very few environments that can handle that sort of intensity. Pampas is one. However, following on from some of this work, there's a lot of people running around saying cropping intensity is the way to go, and we've all got to up our intensity. It's also coming through that, long fallows are a cost to a farming system, in that it's a whole period of time where you're not making any money, but it's setting you up to make money. It's what's filling those soils with water. It's something that's different to southern environments, but a lot of the pressure that says, the northern environments aren't efficient is coming from people in environments where they can grow 1 crop per year. So, any questions so far? We've covered a fair bit in that, and I'm hoping that I haven't just...
Jeremy, I've got one.
Yeah.
What, obviously if we have these long fallows where we've got bare soil for a long time, and, there's a lot of discussion about ground cover and trying to, my understanding about trying to build organic matter and carbon growth into soil so we can and get more aeration, so we can perhaps infiltrate, get better hydration when we do get rain and those sort of things. What's your view on these longer fallows where you haven't got anything green, sort of, if we haven't got green growing plants in there for extended long periods, our organic matter is going to suffer, or our soil health is going to suffer a little bit? Is it just with I mean, that's my sort of understanding, but there's got to be a balance. We can't use the moisture by growing cover crops all the time. But I just wondered what your thoughts were on where's the long bare fallow, but no ground cover as well, but just trying to build moisture at the same time,
Yeah, it's always a trade-off. Funny I say that because that's actually the next slide, but I won't jump to it because it'll distract. There's a few things. I mean, a long fallow is great for getting water, and the argument is, though, it'd be lovely, and all those rainbow charts that I showed show how reliable and how it reduces the risk if you have a full profile. But It's also an interesting argument to run and say, how often do you get a full profile? And then it starts coming down to, well, how much is enough? Now, I've done a lot of work in the north and especially around your area. And I'm pretty comfortable that I'd say if you're starting to go, if you're having to hang on another season and you've already got 100 mils of water stored in the soil, which is about, with a push probe in a grey vertisol, is about 2 feet of, if you can push it in a good 2 feet, so 60 centimetres, that's a rough rule of thumb, should be around 100 mils of soil water. So if you're not leaning on it too hard to get it down there, you've probably got 100 mils. You've got a pretty good chance of getting a reasonable break-even yield. There's lots of ifs and buts and caveats around all of that, but that's how I would look at it. Long fallows, if you can go in with a cereal crop, fantastic, because that's going to give you the most long-lasting cover and give you the best infiltration. If you can't, it is well worth thinking about that little cover crop. If things are looking like it's going to be dry for a while and you're coming into storm season, a 6-week millet crop or whatever and spraying it out costs, when I did that work, which was, I'll admit, 10 years ago, that was costing about $50. It made that $50 back by ×3. So it was well worth getting a bit of cover on the soil. The difficulty with it, though, is generally you plant a millet crop, it grows really well, and then the hard bit is to kill it. So people tend to let them grow a bit too long and they use a bit too much water, and then you start costing the next crop. Has that sort of answered that question? I've talked around it a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And I mean, look, I'm from Walgett area, but or a little bit east of Walgett, but with the hot summers out here, sometimes you have all this nice rain, but we can have a great summer, but we're always looking for planting rain come planting season again. You never sort of get a really good fall in January, February and go, oh, right, we'll just shut, we'll be right now. We still need planting rain every single year, no matter how wet it usually is. So I just sort of, sometimes question that whole, like it's sort of hard. we can have a really good profile, but if you haven't got much cover, it just seems to disappear on you. And
that's right. And
you're
that's
looking out for the horizons for the planting, rain. So I guess it's a balance of trying to build moisture, but keep good ground cover to conserve the moisture as best you can, which is a bit hard when you're trying to conserve moisture. But yeah.
And it's always that trade-off, and because you don't get the planting rains, everyone's gone for pulses, which are great, because you can plant them deep, but the downside of them is they don't leave much cover. So somewhere in there, you've got to get some cereal stubble to provide cover. All right. Thinking of looking at these and thinking about, this really high intensity system, it has a pretty good upside even at Mungandai when you look just at making money. This is a graph that looks at trade-offs. So down the bottom here, we have the number of times you have a failed crop. And I've declared a failed crop as one that doesn't make you any money. So if it has a negative gross margin, in my view, it's a failure. So you can see Pampas, a really strong environment, a bit like Gunnedah. A bit like Gunnedah. Quite a good chance of getting rainfall. You can see here that, the most risky rotation, or the one that makes you the most money, is still less than 1 crop in 10 having a negative gross margin. If we slip across to Mungandai, which would be the same as at Walgett or anywhere, the line's almost flat, which is saying that this one might make a little bit more money, but you're going to have 1 in 4 crops fail. So it's a different way of looking at it and starting to say, okay, maybe I'm not going to make as much money by having these long fallows, but it's going to be a lot more reliable and a lot more resilient. And it all depends on your attitude to risk. The guys at Welbon, when I worked with them, asked me a question one day whether I would plant, and I went right through it, saying how many months of worry it took me just to invest money in buying a car, and then explained that I was working on that 80 percentile level, and they said I'd never make any money at Welbon. So I'll admit I'm a lot more conservative than a lot of people. So, I know people would sit around here would be pretty good. So thinking about all of that, it'd be really nice if there was a way that we could reduce the risk, but still get some of the benefits of intensifying a rotation. And so that's been my latest or most recent bit of work, is looking at ways that you can do that. And a lot of it, our whole talk has come, and I'm about to go over time, I can see. This whole presentation's basically leading to this point, that if you use soil water as your rule, you can, and you stick to it, there are real benefits. So what I did, and I'm going to just take this really aggressive rotation, low intensity, we went sorghum, long fallow wheat, back to sorghum. We intensified it. The most intense situation where we had the 4 crops in 3 years, or we decided that the chickpea and mung beans were flexible. So we always plant sorghum, we always plant wheat, but the chickpea and mung bean, if there wasn't enough water in the soil, we didn't plant them. And the rules we used was if we didn't have 100 mils of water at sowing. And when we did that, you start to see, even at Pampas, the opportunistic one, which is the one that uses the 100 mil rule, starts to make a bit more money. At Billabilla, it's interesting. There's really not a lot of difference. There's a slight bit of upside in the box, but don't let that worry you. And in Mungandai, you start to see a slight improvement. It's not huge. And by picking the intense rotation, that's deliberate, that it's not going to be that big. But if we move on, that's just for familiarity, just to show you exactly how we've looked at the last lot. You can see the opportunistic crop is to the right-hand side for all of them. So it's got its advantages over the really high intense one or the really low intense one. And bringing in these risk profiles here again, crops. This is actually, this is actually sequences with a negative gross margin. So if it's a 3 crop rotation, it's the 3 years summed together. And you can see the environment at Pampas can handle it. And we saw that in the earlier bit of work. But what you start to see here is you can make the same amount of money or even more money than the intense rotation with much less risk by using that rule of only planting when you had 100 mils of water. Another way of looking at it is the return on investment. So this is saying, taking my gross margin and taking the costs from it and seeing how much it cost me. So I've spent $1 in this case, and I've got $1.05 back. So I've spent $1 and I'm making $2.05. In this case, I've spent $1 and I'm making just $1 back. So using the opportunistic rule helped our helped our cash flow as well. Really quickly, because I know we're running out of time. this is just what was going on with the individual crops, which I thought people might find interesting. Up until now, I've been looking at the whole sequence, but it's quite interesting to understand that where did that extra money come from, or where did the risk disappear from? So the high intensity, and if we just, we'll use mung and dye. You can see here, when you're forcing the system to plant a crop, the actual returns from each crop are much less. And it purely makes sense because there's less water. You're using it up and then the crop might fail, but that water's been used up. So sometimes it's better not to plant, as what's happened with the opportunistic crop, where we only planted when we had enough water. And those yields, or those returns, are starting to mirror the ones where we had the long fallow. But I don't know whether you guys can see that thing that keeps popping up in front of me. But anyway, so how many crops were there? If we look at this, this is where we planted every year. So you can see there's about 62, 63 crops planted in my simulation runs. The reason there's so many, we ran the simulation for 63 years. So we had a crop every year in those situations. But the opportunistic ones, for sorghum and wheat, which we said we fixed, we're getting our 62 and 63, but we only had 17 chickpea crops. Yet we made more money, and we only had 37 mung bean crops as opposed to the 62. So it's that difference where we're improving the efficiency of our system. And the final bit is the number of negative gross margins. So down here, there were 41 negative gross margins, comparing it to the opportunistic where you didn't have any. So in the positive side all the time. So I guess to bring all that to a close, knowing your soil is important, and that gets back to that very first question. Is it important to know how much water your soil holds? I would say yes. Do you have to go and have every soil characterised? Probably not, but it is worth going through the exercise once, or working with a group that might be able to give you some better insight. So it helps, knowing about soil water helps you make decisions, and basing decisions on soil water can improve your profitability. The flexible semi-structured rotations help to adapt to seasonal variability, and what everyone's telling us, we're only going to get more and more variability. And I guess that comes down to sometimes the most profitable thing to do is not plant. I'm going to open up for any questions if anyone's got them. Deathly silence.
Yeah, if anyone's not confident to speak, you can always type into the chat box at the bottom.
Or if it's triggered anything and you just shoot me an email, I can give you a ring and we can answer any questions. I know there's a lot in all of that. You've had basically 3 talks jammed together into an hour. So.
What, Jeremy, in your what you're seeing, is there any type of cover crops that you can put down, like for instance out at Walgett, that could be beneficial to helping with that ground cover for those long fallow periods, and in regards to not having the cash crop? Is there any other alternatives, or some alternatives out there that you'd recommend? You touched on millet.
Apart from millet, I'm a bit of a favour on millet because it's quick. The best sort of cover crops you can get, it depends on the purpose. So a lot of people are growing cover crops for stock, and for creating a brown manure, in which case it's really good to have legumes and things mixed in with them. That also is the downside of that is the moment you mix legumes in them, they grow slower and they break down faster, purely because but you are getting a benefit by having nitrogen. In the north, if you're happy and comfortable with putting your nitrogen in as a fertilizer, then you're really wanting to capture as much water and prevent soil loss as you can, which really means a cereal stubble is the best you can do. And if you're wanting to plant that on rain and coming into a summer season, a millet is probably the best you can go for. If you're going into a winter season, I mean, you've got a lot more options of barleys and even triticale will put on a lot of straw, because basically you're trying to get straw as quickly as you can so you can spray it out once you've got 1 to 2 tonnes of biomass there.
Excellent. Bill, we've just had a comment in the comments box.
Oh yeah, so Dave is part of the Northern Farming Systems work, and he's put together some recent stuff. I think Andrew Airbecker has been doing some on our farming systems site at Mungandai. So if you're around that area, I would go and see the field days out there and talk to them. If you're Walgett's, probably we have a field site at Narrabri. I don't think they're doing cover crop work on that, but I could be wrong, but that would be worth looking at as well.
I think the publications I've seen by David seem to summarise the cover crop situation very well and how to get a benefit from them. I thought his publications were kind of very clear and straightforward and made a lot of sense, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. He doesn't have my groovy video though.
Well,
It's a standing joke between Dave and I. He wanted a copy of it at one stage, and I sent it to him and it got lost. So the next talk I went, "What do you mean? You didn't use the video?"
What was good about David's publication is he kind of stuck to water instead of kind of diverting off into other aspects of cover crops, which are very hard to pin down.
That's right.
I think we just, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Penny. I was just asking about the soil water app. I did hop on it one day. I sort of felt like my best starting point was going to be after some significant rainfall when I knew I had a full profile and work from there. But is that a useful tool?
So you're
Just
meaning
get a bit of an idea. That's David Freeban, I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's called soil water app, something like that.
it was, and I'm trying to get the name now because it's on my phone. I was looking at it this morning, actually. Climate. So the Climate app includes the soil water app now as well, as well as a whole lot of other bits and pieces. Yeah, look, they're a great tool. It is always hard to get that starting point. So some of the consultants I work with who have characterised their soils don't go and test them every year. They basically rely on the app, but they do every few, sort of 10 years or 5 or 6 years. If they're uncertain or things aren't performing how they think they should have, they'll go and do a test. So, I mean, Bill's probably the better person to talk to about this. He's done soil coring all over the place, but just working out how much water the soil holds, or just working, and also just knowing those boundaries is really important. I always get frightened when someone tells me that, you say, well, how full's the profile? And they go, oh, it's 50, 30% full or something. And I'm going, 30% of what? What are we talking? If you don't know how much it holds, how can you know that it's 30%? But usually after a discussion, we work it out that, they know they can push their push probe in so far when it's full, and they can only get it a third of the way in at the moment. So they're saying it's 30%, which is fine.
So this question might be for Bill as well then, but like, is it worthwhile? And perhaps there's been projects, but like with the Landcare group, actually having, getting some funding to do some project where we actually do go out and get some soil cores on local farms and to get that basic data.
Working out your plant available water is it's more time consuming than kind of expensive in materials and everything. It's having the time to fill up the drum to get it really wet.
Yep.
And it's then getting your dry end can be tricky. Like particularly last year, couldn't get a dry end. Because it rained at home, you can't get a dry end.
Yeah,
it's probably, well, it's like a lot of things. People should probably do it more than they do, because it's not tremendously expensive. It just takes a bit of time and patience to do it. Yeah.
And there are. Sorry, I was going to say there are alternative ways. You go, Penny.
I was just going to say, Janelle, I think that possibly we could have some further discussion with the people out there, and also with our Rachel Dorney, and look at possibly putting together some sort of project out there, looking at those particular water levels and content of the soil structure. I think that if that's would be benefit out there, I think we could definitely look towards applying, to some grants or programs to make that happen.
So what I'd suggest you do before you do that, or to help you do that, would be to jump on the AppSim info site, type in app soil. There's a database and a Google Earth reference system, KML, that will show you everywhere we've ever tested. Alternatively, if you have an iPad, you can download the Soil Matters app, which is all the same data, plus all of CSIRO's and the State Department's soil coring sites, all linked together so that you can get an estimate of how much soil water you would expect at your site and where work's been done. Because I think you'll find that, and you will find quite a few places around. On top of that, Kirsten Verberg has just finished a whole lot of surveys around, and I know she did one down through Garra because I gave her a whole lot of sites. So, and I think with a little bit of help, there's generally research projects happening, and we tend to do a characterisation whenever we do a project. Lots of people get them done for free by offering the corner of a paddock for research to be done on, and everybody wins that way.
Oh, that's good, thank you.
I'm just looking, I was trying to find the actual download site for Soil Map. There's also a book. Sorry,
there was a fellow came through called Brett Cox. I think he was with CSIRO.
Yeah, Brett works with me.
Ways of predicting, what was it? I don't know. Anyway, but he did a lot of soil sampling between Moree and North Star, sort of up the Newell. And yeah.
That's the project I was referring to by Kirsten. She led the project, Brett did the work.
Ah, there you go. Yeah, righto. So, well, he was definitely east of the Newell when he was asking me for some farms, but that might have just been one section of it. Mm.
Yeah, they were. So what they did was basically looked on this this Google Earth map that I have and looked for holes where there wasn't a lot of soil information, and then went to fill them in.
Yeah, good.
So, I don't know, I can show you. I'll try, and while you're talking, I'll try and open it and give you a look.
There's a little book that Kirsten and Brett and myself and a few other people did on Liverpool Plains. You'll find that on the internet, or we can send one. We did about 10 sites on the Liverpool Plains. So Liverpool Plains should be pretty well covered now. Yeah.
I think if you're looking for any of this stuff, I would also always look on the GRDC website, because they're the ones that have probably funded most of this work. And so if there's anything happening, they will have done it. Let's see. I don't know how quickly that's refreshing on your screen.
You know, we can see the sites. There's all sorts.
So there's quite a bit up through here. We are getting thinner as we get out that way. So probably fine. Yeah, well, Brett did that one. I'm just looking where we are. Mungandai, Weemala, Garra. Yeah, so there is a bit of a hole there, I agree. That's probably one of your better farming paddocks. Looks like I did that one.
So the Soil app, I mean, Soil Matters app that's on iPad, it's got exactly the same database. So we're not going to find any more.
You won't find any more.
Okay.
You'll find different layers though, which is what Brett and Kirsten's project and their new report will talk about, how you could look at that and relate it. So basically there's a whole lot of soil mapping that's gone on, and you can start to say, is that soil the same as my soil here? It probably wouldn't be, because you can see here there's the creek lines, and then you're starting to get a bit of red soil coming through, or sandier soil on those ridge lines, and then it goes back down into the black. But yeah, so that's the KML app. I can probably, if it'll export, I'll throw that on the site as well.
One last question for me, sorry, but
Yep.
What about EM mapping? Is there anything in that can help us with our, trying to get a moisture content at all, or is it just soil variability?
So EM mapping will give you a few things, but again, some of it, how meaningful it is if you don't know how much your soil holds, is always one of the questions. So it will tell you how variable. It's very good at picking up salt. It can also be used to pick up the amount of moisture in the soil at the start and at the end, provided you've got reference points, like a wet and a dry reference point. But it's not like, and you can use it, I guess, like a neutron tube, but realistically, one of the easiest things to do is to just go and push a core into the soil and have a look at it. It's one of the cheapest and easiest ways to do things.
Thanks, Jeremy.
I mean, before I would run and, if you're getting yield maps, and you're wondering why you're getting different yields across a paddock, even just using something like Google Earth can map out where soils may be changing. You know, you start to see different patterns in the soil, and linking that with yield maps and then perhaps a EM survey will help you start to understand and explain the variability across a paddock. But as for just as a water, I think there's better and easier tools if you're just interested in how much water you've got. Right. So the final bit I was going to ask you, but it's a bit hard, so I won't, is what bit of this you found the most interesting?
I like going through the equations of what the crop needed versus and working out your yield potential, because I actually haven't ever done that before, and it's pretty straightforward. So
Yeah.
It's good to have that now. So thank you.
So will you do anything differently as a result of seeing that?
Well, I reckon, well, one thing is that 100 mil, like to use that as a rule of thumb and go home and tell my husband and our share farmer that that's maybe something that we keep in the back of our minds. I think we probably do anyway at this stage, because we are on a more marginal farming area. But
I was going to say, the more marginal you are, the more you should push it up a bit too. So, you know, if you're really marginal, I'd be pushing it up to 150. So if we were doing this talk at Walgett, we tend to, for sorghum and things, we talk 150 as opposed to 100.
We're halfway between Ashley and Garrah, but it's marginal in that it's quite sodic soils. We haven't got nice soft soils, and there's a little bit of chlorine at depth as well, so that lowers our bucket. But certainly to be able to just explain how much water we really need for that crop, rather than just on these estimates all the time, really looking into that. Just, yeah, it was good.
Yep, cool.
Great, thanks, Jeremy.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'll get off Jeremy after we leave here all the wonderful apps and links that he's spoken about today, and put them in an email to everyone. So, and also a recording of the presentation. So thank you all for coming and joining us, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you to everyone at Garrah.
Thanks, Penny.
All right.
Jeremy.
See you.
Excellent.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.